Captain Elias stood quietly in the docking bay of the Seralith Star Palace, his hands folded behind his back, his posture straight but not proud. He wore the plain armor of a human guard, nothing ornate, no glowing crests, no heavy shoulder plates, like the Seralith warriors who towered around him. His equipment looked small and light compared to theirs, almost fragile, yet his calm presence gave him an unusual weight. The Seralith nobles whispered among themselves as they passed him. They were tall, elegant, and powerful in their movements. Their dark armor shimmered with strange metals. To them, a human soldier was little more than a ceremonial figure, someone placed here for politics, not real defense. Elias heard their comments but showed no reaction. He had grown used to such judgment. Humanity was still a young member of the Galactic Union, small in number and modest in technology. Most species considered them weak, but Elias never let that trouble his mind. Today his new duty began. He had been chosen to serve as personal guard to Princess Vera, heir to the Seralith Empire. It was a role he did not expect, and many suspected it was nothing more than a gesture meant to please human diplomats. Still, Elias accepted the order with quiet discipline. A guard's duty, after all, was not to question, but to protect. When Princess Vera entered the hall, the whispers grew louder. She walked with the grace of her people, her silver robes flowing behind her, her gaze sharp as starlight. She was young by Seralith standards, but already known for her intelligence and strong will. Many nobles believed she would one day rule with unmatched power. She paused when her eyes fell on Elias. "This is the human guard?" she asked, her voice smooth but carrying a hint of disbelief. The chamberlain bowed. "Yes, Highness. Captain Elias of Earth." Her brows lifted slightly. She circled Elias as if studying a puzzle. Compared to her tall frame, Elias looked small, his armor unremarkable, his sword plain. He did not flinch under her gaze. "You seem calm," Vera said at last. "Do you understand what this duty requires?" "Yes, Princess," Elias answered simply. His voice carried no arrogance, no attempt to impress. Vera narrowed her eyes. "We shall see." She turned and walked toward the great hall. "Follow." Elias stepped behind her, his movements measured, his boots quiet on the shining floor. The hall stretched wide, filled with Seralith banners and glowing chandeliers that cast light like living stars. Nobles lined the sides, watching the human with thin smiles. Some whispered bets on how long he would last. Others predicted he would beg for release within a week. Elias heard nothing but the rhythm of his steps. That evening, Vera began her first test. She summoned her elite guards into the training chamber. They were armored in heavy plates, their weapons carved with runes. Elias entered without hesitation, his simple blade at his side. "Captain Elias," Vera said from her high seat, "you will spar against one of my personal guards. Do not hold back." The Seralith guard before him stood nearly 2 heads taller than Elias, muscles corded with strength. When the match began, the aliens struck with heavy blows, each swing like a hammer. Elias did not meet force with force. He moved lightly, dodging, letting the strikes pass him. His blade tapped, quick and precise, striking the weak spots of armor. Instead of clashing against strength, the nobles expected him to fall within moments. Yet the match stretched on. Elias could not overpower the Seralith, but he endured. He breathed steadily, patient, his strikes small but clever. At last, the guard lowered his weapon, laughing in disbelief. "This human does not fight with strength," the guard admitted. "He fights with patience." Vera watched silently, her sharp gaze unreadable. She dismissed the chamber with a wave of her hand. Later, when they traveled across the palace gardens, Vera spoke again. "You lasted longer than I expected. Yet strength is only one measure. A guard must endure more than combat. Tomorrow you will accompany me to the northern peaks. Let us see how your human body handles Seralith winters." The next day, they traveled by skimmer ship to the icy peaks of Kareth. The winds howled like living beasts, and the air was thin and sharp. Elias wore his simple armor, a cloak wrapped around him. The Seralith guards walked with ease, their bodies adapted to harsh climates. Elias did not complain. His breath came heavy, and frost clung to his eyelashes, but he kept pace step by step. When the path grew narrow and dangerous, he held out his hand to steady the princess, though his own fingers were stiff from cold. Vera noticed, though she said nothing. By nightfall, when they reached the outpost, Elias collapsed against the wall, exhausted but not broken. He rose again when he saw the princess glance his way, refusing to show weakness in his duty. That night, while she looked out over the frozen stars, Vera admitted to herself that the human was not what she expected. He was not strong like her people, not grand in presence, yet he did not falter. His silence carried a strength of its own. The following week, during a diplomatic gathering, the true test arrived. Assassins from a rival faction slipped into the palace. Disguised as servants, they rushed toward the princess with hidden blades. Elias reacted before anyone else. With no time to draw his weapon, he threw himself between the attackers and Vera. The blades cut across his armor. Sparks flying, but he pushed forward, using his smaller frame to force one assassin into the wall. His movements were sharp, disciplined, not wild. He fought with focus, shielding the princess, even as the Seralith guard scrambled to respond. By the time the last assassin fell, Elias stood with a bleeding shoulder, his breathing steady. He turned to the princess. "Are you unharmed?" he asked. Vera stared at him, her heart racing. "I am unharmed," she answered softly. The nobles who witnessed the attack were stunned. A human had placed himself at the front without hesitation. It's not for glory, but for duty. Later that night, Vera returned to her chambers and thought about the day. She had tested him with combat, with endurance, and fate itself had tested him with danger. Each time, the modest human stood firm. She had expected weakness. Yet what she saw was a strength her people often forgot, the strength of resolve. As she lay awake, she whispered to herself, "Perhaps there is more to this human than I thought." And though Elias rested in the guard quarters with his wound bandaged, he did not think of honor or recognition. He thought only of his next watch, of the silent duty he had promised. The assignment had only begun. The tests would continue. Yet something unspoken had already shifted between them. The princess was watching him differently now. Princess Vera believed that humans survived only by luck. In her mind, they were soft compared to the mighty species of the galaxy. Yet the memory of Captain Elias standing before assassins still troubled her. He had not looked afraid. He had not asked for help. He had shielded her as though it was the most natural thing to do. But Vera was not one to be convinced by one moment of bravery. She decided the human must be tested further. A single act could be chance. True strength, she believed, showed itself again and again. The very next morning, she called for Elias. He entered her chamber in the same quiet way as always. His plain armor was polished but not decorated. His sword was sheathed at his side. He bowed his head slightly. "You called, Princess?" He asked. "Yes," she replied, her voice sharp. "You will join my personal guard in today's training. I want to see what you can do when faced with more than one opponent." Elias nodded. "As you command." The training hall was wide and bright, filled with the sound of clashing blades. Seralith warriors sparred in pairs, their heavy weapons striking with enough force to shake the floor. When Elias stepped inside, silence fell. Dozens of tall warriors turned their eyes to the modest human. Some smirked, others laughed quietly. "Your Highness," one guard said boldly, "this human will not last even a minute." "Then let us see," Vera answered. Her silver eyes glinting, the match began with 3 warriors stepping forward. Each one was larger than Elias, their armor layered with strong alloys. The first swung his massive blade down at him. Elias did not block directly. He shifted aside, letting the blow crash into the ground. The second warrior struck from the side. Elias bent low, rolling out of reach. His movements were light, almost too light for a battlefield. But they saved him each time. The third warrior pressed forward, pushing Elias back. For a moment it looked as if the human would fall. But then Elias used the warrior's weight against him, pulling him forward so that the alien stumbled. The crowd gasped as Elias tapped his sword against the guard's chest. Plate just enough to mark a strike. The fight stretched on. Elias could not overpower them, but he endured longer than anyone expected. He was breathing heavily, sweat shining on his brow, but his focus never broke. When at last Vera raised her hand to end the match, the warriors stepped back. Panting harder than the human, the hall erupted in mixed voices. Some mocked the Seralith guards for being matched by a human. Others murmured that perhaps the human was not as weak as they thought. Elias bowed to his opponents. "Thank you," he said simply. Princess Vera did not show her thoughts. But deep inside, her doubt began to tremble. That evening, she prepared another trial. This time, it was not combat, but intellect. She called Elias into the royal library, a place filled with tall shelves of glowing data crystals and ancient records. "Tell me, Captain," she said, holding out a crystal, "do humans solve puzzles as well as they fight? Here is a riddle from my people, unsolved by many who have tried." She recited the riddle slowly. "I am always hungry. I must always be fed. The finger I touch will soon turn red." What am I? Elias stood in silence for a moment. He did not rush. His eyes lowered as he thought. At last he answered, "It is fire." The princess blinked. Correct. She had not expected him to answer so quickly. "And how did you know?" she asked. "In human history," Elias replied, "fire has always been both a friend and an enemy. We know it well." The princess said nothing, but she felt a flicker of respect. The next journey tested him in another way. Vera was due to visit the desert world of Jirith, a planet of sandstorms and scorching heat. It was one of the harshest climates in the Seralith Empire. When their ship landed, the heat pressed down like a heavy hand. Seralith guards moved steadily, their bodies hardened to withstand extremes. Elias followed in silence, his skin burning, sweat dripping down his face. The ground burned through the soles of his boots, and the sun blazed like fire above. Still, he marched beside the princess. When a sandstorm rose suddenly from the horizon, the winds howled and tore at their cloaks. Visibility dropped to nothing. Guards shouted to one another, but their voices vanished in the storm. It was Elias who spotted a narrow ridge of rocks ahead. He shouted for the group to follow and led them into the shelter just before the storm reached its peak. The guards stared at him in surprise. "How did you see that in the storm?" one asked. "Humans have lived in deserts too," Elias replied simply. "We learned to look closely." Princess Vera studied him again. Each trial seemed to bring out another strength she had not expected. She could not deny what she had seen. The human did not crumble under combat puzzles or harsh climates. But the greatest test came without her planning. On their return to the palace, another assassination attempt struck. This time, it was not clumsy servants with hidden blades. It was a coordinated attack from the shadows. Energy bolts fired across the hall as masked figures dropped from the ceiling. Seralith guards drew their weapons. But the attack was fast and merciless. In the chaos, one bolt sped straight toward the princess. Elias saw it in an instant. He moved without thought, pushing Vera aside and taking the blast on his own shoulder. The force threw him to the ground, his armor smoking. The princess gasped, kneeling beside him. "Elias." But the human was already pushing himself up, ignoring the pain. He stood in front of her again, sword drawn, even as his shoulder bled and his breath grew ragged. He fought with steady strikes, defending her until the last assassin was defeated. When the hall was quiet again, Elias lowered his blade and turned to the princess. "Are you safe?" he asked, his voice calm despite his wound. For the first time, Princess Vera could not speak. Her chest felt tight, her thoughts tangled. She had meant only to test him, but fate had shown her something far greater. The human's body might be fragile, but his spirit was stronger than steel. That night, as Elias rested in the infirmary, Vera stood alone in the balcony, looking out at the stars. She whispered to herself, "Why does he keep standing? No matter how many times I expect him to fall." She did not yet know the answer, but she knew one thing for certain. Her heart had begun to see the human differently, and she feared that soon. No trial would be enough to make her doubt him again. Princess Vera could not push away her thoughts. Captain Elias had passed every trial she had set before him. He had sparred with her strongest guards and endured. He had solved her riddles with calm thought. He had survived the burning deserts and icy peaks without complaint. And when danger struck, he had stood in front of her without hesitation. Taking the wounds himself, yet doubt still lingered inside her. Could one human truly be so strong in spirit? Could it be more than luck? She was heir to the Seralith throne, and she could not allow her judgment to be swayed so easily. She told herself she needed one final proof, a test that would be greater than all the others combined. She would send Elias into the ruins of Talcora, a place feared even by Seralith warriors. The ruins stood on a distant moon, half buried in shadow and dust. Long ago, an ancient people had built towers there, filled with machines and traps. Many warriors had entered to claim its relics, but few had returned. Those who did came back scarred, whispering of puzzles no blade could break and creatures that hunted in silence. When Vera announced the mission, the council gasped. "Your Highness," one noble warned, "Talcora is no place for a human. If our strongest soldiers fail there, what chance does he have?" "That is the point," Vera answered coldly. "If he is truly worthy of his post, he will survive. If not, then he should never have stood at my side in the first place." Elias listened quietly as she spoke. He made no protest, no plea. When the princess gave him the order, he bowed his head. "As you command, princess, I will bring back the relic." The journey to Talcora was silent. Vera watched Elias from across the ship's chamber. He was sharpening his plain sword, though many said no blade would help him in that place. His face showed no fear. He looked as he always did come, steady, unshaken. When they landed on the moon, the entrance to the ruins yawned before them, a black mouth of stone. The Seralith guards who accompanied the princess stayed behind. None dared step inside. Only Elias walked forward. The princess called after him, "If you wish to turn back, now is the time." Elias looked over his shoulder. "I gave my word. I will return." Then he vanished into the darkness. Inside, the air was heavy and cold. Strange symbols glowed faintly on the walls, lighting his way with pale light. The first chamber was filled with moving stones that shifted like jaws, opening and closing across the floor. A Seralith warrior might have tried to smash through, but Elias studied the pattern. He crouched low, counting the rhythm, and then moved swiftly between the gaps. He crossed without a scratch. The second chamber held a puzzle of mirrors and beams of light. Many would have forced their way through, only to be burned by energy traps. Elias did not rush. He traced the path of the beams, adjusted the mirrors with patient hands, and slowly unlocked the gate. Hours passed as he moved deeper. His body grew tired, but his mind stayed sharp. In one cavern, strange creatures with crystal skin slithered from the shadows. Their eyes glowed red as they circled him. Elias did not draw his sword at once. Instead, he studied their movements. When they lunged, he dodged, striking only when he had no choice. He discovered they feared the sound of steel scraping against stone, and by dragging his blade along the wall, he drove them back. He was not the strongest. He was not the fastest, but he adapted, always finding a way forward. At last, he reached the heart of the ruins. There, on a pedestal, lay the relicosphere of ancient crystal. Glowing faintly with blue light, Elias approached with care. The floor trembled under his weight. Traps clicked awake, blades sliding from the walls, darts firing from hidden holes. He dashed forward, rolling beneath the blades, using his smaller size to slip through spaces too narrow for larger bodies. His shoulder burned from an old wound, but he pressed on. Seizing the relic at last, when he held it in his hands, the glow brightened. He breathed deeply, steadying himself. Then, with the same calm focus he had shown since the first day, he turned and made his way back. Hours later, he emerged from the ruins. His armor was cut, his skin scratched, his steps heavy with exhaustion. But he was alive, and in his hands he carried the relic. The Seralith guards stared in disbelief. The nobles who had doubted him fell into silence. Princess Vera herself felt her breath catch in her chest. She had not truly believed he would return. Elias walked to her and bowed his head. "The relic, princess, as you asked?" She reached out, her fingers brushing against the crystal. Her eyes lifted to his face. For the first time, she saw more than a soldier. She saw a man who had walked through death itself without fear, a man who did not seek glory or praise only to fulfill his promise. "Why?" she whispered. "Why risk so much when you could have refused?" Elias looked at her calmly. "Because I swore to protect you. A guard does not choose only the easy duties." That night, the princess could not sleep. She stood on the balcony, looking at the stars. The image of Elias emerging from the ruins burned in her mind. She had thought humans weak, but she now understood that their strength was not in their bodies, but in their hearts. They endured where others gave up. They adapted where others broke. She realized something she had never dared before. She did not only admire Elias, she cared for him. Yet with that thought came fear. A Seralith princess and a human guard, such a bond would anger the Empire. Nobles would call it disgrace. Enemies would use it to weaken her claim. Still, she could not deny the truth in her heart. When she saw Elias again the next morning, standing quietly at his post, she felt her chest tighten. She wanted to speak, to tell him what she felt, but the words would not come. Instead, she said softly, "You have passed every trial, Captain Elias. You have nothing left to prove." Elias bowed. "Thank you, princess." But as he turned his eyes back to the horizon, Vera knew this was not the end. It was only the beginning of something far greater than any trial she could create. For the first time in her life, Princess Vera feared not the strength of her enemies, but the strength of her own heart. The palace had grown quieter after the return from Tolkera, but Princess Vera's thoughts were anything but calm. She often replayed the moment Elias stepped out of the ruins, wounded but alive, holding the relic in his hands. He had looked weary, yet steady, like a mountain that refused to fall, no matter how fierce the storm. Vera had told him he had nothing left to prove, and she meant it. Yet in her heart, she knew the truth was more than duty. It was something far deeper, something she had never felt before. For the first time in her life, Princess Vera feared her own feelings. Elias returned to his normal post as if nothing had changed. Each day he walked behind her in silence, stood guard at her chamber doors, and spoke only when needed. He never asked for thanks. He never mentioned the dangers he had faced. His modesty only deepened her confusion. At night, when she was alone, she wondered, does he feel the same? Or am I a fool for thinking a human guard could care for a princess? Her heart urged her to speak, but her mind warned her of the cost. The Empire was proud, its nobles proudest of all. They would see her affection for a human as weakness, perhaps even betrayal. Already whispers had begun to spread about her choice of guard. The noble's eyes followed Elias with open suspicion, some even with hatred still. Her heart could not turn away. The chance to speak came during a quiet evening in the gardens. The air was cool, filled with the soft glow of floating lights. Elias followed her as usual, silent and steady. Vera paused near the fountain, watching the ripples in the water. "Captain Elias," she said softly. "Yes, princess," he answered, his voice calm. She hesitated. For a Seralith princess, words were often weapons or commands. But now she needed words that revealed her heart, not her authority. "You have been tested more than any guard should," she began, "and you never once complained." "It is my duty," Elias replied simply. She looked at him, her silver eyes searching his steady face. "Is duty the only reason you stand by me?" Elias paused. He seemed to consider his answer carefully. "Duty brought me here, but respect keeps me here. I respect your courage, princess, and I will always protect you." Her chest tightened. Respect. Not love, but respect. Yet it was more than most nobles ever gave her. Taking a quiet breath, She stepped closer. Elias, I have admired many warriors in my life. They were strong, clever, skilled, but none of them have shown me what you have shown me. You are not proud, yet you never bend. You are not the strongest, but you endure when others fall. And when danger strikes, you stand in front of me without thought for yourself. Elias said nothing. His calm face gave away little, but his eyes seemed softer than usual. Vera lowered her voice. I cannot deny it any longer. I admire you, Elias. More than that tie, have come to care for you. Not as a princess for her guard, but as a woman for the one who has earned her heart. The words hung in the air like a fragile thread. Elias looked at her with quiet shock. For the first time since she had met him, he seemed unsure of himself. He did not speak at once. His modesty held him still, as though he feared saying the wrong thing. Finally, he answered softly, Princess, I am honored by your words, but I never sought such affection. I only wished to serve. Her heart ached at his humility, yet it also warmed her. He had not come seeking reward or glory. His loyalty was true, unshaken by desire. That made her feelings for him even stronger. The following days were not peaceful. News of the attack at Tolkara spread across the empire, and with it came rumors. Nobles whispered that the princess was growing too close to her human guard. Some claimed she was disgracing her lineage. Others feared she was planning something that would change the balance of power. During a council meeting, one elder spoke openly. Your Highness, this human's presence dishonors the throne. How can the heir of Serelith be guarded by a species so fragile? Remove him before our enemies use this weakness against us. Vera's jaw tightened. But before she could speak, Elias stepped forward. If my presence dishonors the princess, I will step down willingly, he said calmly. The council murmured in surprise. He was ready to give up his position, not to defend himself, but to spare the princess trouble. Vera rose to her feet. No, she said firmly. He will not step down. He has proven his worth in ways none of you have. While you speak of honor, he acts with it. While you guard your pride, he guards lives. I will not remove him. The hall fell silent. The nobles exchanged uneasy looks, but none dared challenge her openly. That night, Elias stood once more at her door. She opened it quietly and found him there. Still as stone? You would have left, she said softly. To protect me from shame, I would, Elias replied. Her heart swelled with both anger and tenderness. You fool, she whispered. Do you not see? You are the one I need most. Not because of politics, not because of duty, but because you are you. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Elias lowered his head. Princess, if I admit my heart, then I fail my post. A guard must not desire what he is sworn to protect. Then let it be more than guard and princess, she answered. Let it be equals. Her voice trembled as she spoke the words. But her eyes were steady. In the days that followed, their bond deepened in quiet ways. They did not declare it before the empire, but in their private moments, their eyes spoke what words could not. She would walk slower so that he might walk beside her instead of behind. He would allow himself small smiles when she looked his way. But their closeness did not go unnoticed. Rumors grew louder. Enemies outside the empire saw a chance to strike, believing the Serelith throne was distracted and divided. Reports came of hostile fleets gathering at the borders. Vera stood in her war chamber, listening to her advisors argue. Some demanded harsher rule. Others called for retreat. The empire was on the edge of panic. Through it all, Elias stood quietly at her side. When the voices grew too loud, Vera turned to him. What would you do, Captain? She asked. The nobles scoffed. What can a human say of war? But Elias spoke calmly. I would remind the people that strength is not only in power, but in unity. If the empire shows fear, the enemies will grow bold. If the empire shows resolve, the enemies will think twice. His words were simple, but they carried weight. For the first time, Vera saw her counsel fall silent at a human's advice. She looked at him with pride, and with something deeper. Then that is what we will do, she said. That night, as the stars burned over the palace, Vera stood with Elias on the balcony. The winds were cool, carrying the scent of the gardens. "I fear what is coming," she admitted. "The Empire trembles, and the enemies circle like wolves. But when you stand beside me, I feel no fear." "Do you understand what you mean to me, Elias?" He met her gaze at last, his modest calm breaking just slightly. "I think I do, Princess, and though my heart tells me to stay silent, I can no longer deny it. I care for you as more than my duty. I care for you as a man who cannot help but admire the woman you are." Vera's breath caught. At last the words she longed to hear in that quiet moment. Beneath the endless stars, the human guard and the alien princess shared a bond no council could erase. It was a dangerous truth, a fragile flame, but it burned bright all the same. And soon, that flame would be tested by fire greater than either of them could imagine. The Seralith capital stood under a sky that burned with streaks of fire. Ships clashed in orbit, their energy weapons flashing like storms of light. The ground trembled as explosions echoed from the city's outer defenses. The Empire had been caught off guard by a sudden alien coalition that saw weakness in the princess's new alliance with humans. They hoped to strike before the Seralith could unify with humanity. Captain Elias, the modest human guard, stood at the central command hall. His uniform was torn from earlier fights, and his hands carried the marks of battle, but his eyes were calm. Around him, Seralith commanders shouted over each other, their tall frames pacing in frustration. The enemy forces were overwhelming, and panic had begun to set in. Princess Vera entered the chamber, her armor gleaming under the light. She looked at her people and saw fear that threatened to collapse everything she had worked for. When her gaze fell on Elias, she saw no fear. Instead, he was studying the battle maps, his mind quietly working through the chaos. "Captain," she said softly, though all turned to listen, "do you see a way through this storm?" Elias looked up. He was not the strongest in the room, nor the most decorated, but his voice carried a weight that stilled the arguing generals. "The enemy expects us to fight like them," he said. "They expect us to rely on strength and numbers. But strength isn't enough when you're outnumbered. What we need is something different, something they won't see coming." He stepped closer to the map and pointed at the enemy formations. "Their ships form a ring around the capital. It looks unbreakable. But look, here this cluster leaves a gap, small but dangerous for them. They think no one would dare move through it. We will. We'll use decoys and draw their strongest forces into pursuit, then strike their supply lines. If they lose their supplies, their strength collapses." The Seralith commanders exchanged doubtful glances. To them, such tactics were strange, almost reckless. But Vera's eyes lit with recognition. She had seen Elias's clever mind at work before, surviving traps, solving puzzles, and standing against impossible odds. "We will follow him," she declared. "This human has already proven his worth when none of us believed in him. If you trust me as your princess, then trust him." Her words cut through hesitation. One by one, the commanders bowed their heads. The battle that followed was unlike any the Seralith had fought before. Using smaller human ships mixed with Seralith craft, Elias organized daring feints. They darted into enemy formations, drawing the coalition into overextending. Meanwhile, hidden units slipped through the weak gap Elias had spotted. Striking at fuel depots and communication relays, the enemy realized too late what was happening. Their massive warships, so proud and strong, suddenly found themselves stranded and disorganized. Seralith forces, inspired by Ilias's strategy, fought with renewed vigor. On the ground, the enemy breached part of the city walls, but Elias himself led a defense at the gate. With only a handful of soldiers, he stood firm, directing fire, setting traps, and rallying the defenders. Where the Seralith might have retreated, Elias pressed forward. Turning the tide with sheer determination, Princess Vera fought beside him, her blade flashing as she struck down foes. More than once, Elias placed himself between her and danger, though she matched him strike for strike. Together they became a symbol for both armies, a human and a Seralith, standing as one, as the sun rose the next day. The enemy coalition retreated in defeat. The capital still stood, scarred but unbroken. In the central square, Citizens gathered to cheer their defenders. Songs rose, not only in honor of the Seralith warriors, but also for the human who had led them to victory. Elias, however, stood at the edge of the crowd, humble as ever. He did not seek the spotlight, nor did he bask in the praise. He only felt relief that the people were safe. Princess Vera found him there. Her armor was dented, her face marked by soot, but her eyes shone with pride. "They cheer for you," she said softly. "Even my people, who once doubted you, now see what I saw. They call you the modest guard, but I know you as more than that." Elias lowered his gaze. "I only did what was needed. Any soldier would have done the same." "No," she said firmly, taking his hand. "Not any soldier. Only you. You fought not for glory, but for duty, for life, for me, and I will not let that be forgotten." Before the gathered crowd, she raised their joined hands high. "This human saved not only me, but our entire empire. From this day forward, humanity shall stand as our equal, not as a fragile species, but as allies whose strength lies in spirit and heart." The crowd roared in agreement, their voices echoing through the city. In the weeks that followed, the Seralith Empire formally signed its alliance with humanity. Elisa's story spread across the stars, retold as the tale of the modest guard who out-fought an empire's enemies and won the heart of its princess. He became a symbol of what humanity brought to the galaxy, not overwhelming power, but resilience, creativity, and courage. For Elias, however, none of the titles mattered. What mattered was the bond he had formed with Princess Vera. In her presence, he no longer felt like a fragile outsider. He felt seen, respected, cherished. As they stood together on a balcony overlooking the rebuilt city, Vera rested her hand on his shoulder. "What followed," she said with a smile, "was a future I never imagined. You taught me that strength comes in many forms, and you taught me love." Elias looked at her, his modest smile returning. "And you taught me that even in the vastness of the stars, one heart can change everything." The stars stretched endlessly above them, but neither felt small. Together, they had written a new chapter in galactic history, one where a modest human guard proved that humanity, though underestimated, could inspire an empire.